Hello and welcome to In the Green. My name is Matthew Abel and we're here today with Susan Fawcett and Ray Ziarno. Susan was the Green Party candidate for the University of Michigan Board of Regents in this past election, 2002, and Ray was the Green Party candidate for Secretary of State in Michigan. Neither one of them actually won the race, but in my book they're both winners. Anybody who runs for a political office and works as hard as the two of these people did deserves our praise and our thanks. So thank you both very much, and thank you for coming here today to be on the show.
Thanks for inviting us, Matt.
Susan, you ran for the University of Michigan Board of Regents, and you're a student at U of M, right?
Yep.
I don't think a student has ever been elected to that board, and you got quite a few votes. What do you attribute that to? Your difficult campaign, your hard work, name recognition, what was it?
Well, I think what might have helped me a lot is this summer I was working as a waitress pretty much every day for about 6 weeks, and I wore this Green Party button every single day. So, you know, you wait on about 100 people a day, and, you know, people tend to ask you, oh, so do you go to school, or what's Green Party? And you just sort of slip in, well, as a matter of fact, I'm running for the University of Michigan Board of Regents, and you can vote for me this November if you're registered in Michigan. So I think that may have helped.
And you probably had campaign literature in your back pocket.
No, not at that point, but the tablecloth was paper, and I always had some crayons or something so I could, you know, write it down for them, or, you know, give a little explanation of instant runoff voting in every 10th table or so.
That's great. And Ray, what about your campaign? How did you find that it went? You traveled around Michigan quite a bit.
Quite a bit, yes, Matt, as time and resources allowed, and a little bit of money allowed, yeah. And plus, we get a lot of invitations from nonprofit organizations, community organizations, the so-called candidate forums and candidate nights, and you try to make as many of those as possible. Some are productive, some aren't quite so productive. There were quite a few personal appearances at these so-called campaign forums or campaign forums or meet the candidates nights, in which the number of candidates exceeded the number of people attending them.
Right, and my experience has been that early on in the campaign there's not enough to do, there aren't enough events to attend, and later on toward election day there are too many events that you can't possibly attend all of them. Everybody wants the candidates 2 weeks before the election.
Yeah, they're loaded in the tail end of the campaign season, as you say, correct. In fact, we could have gone to 2 or 3 a day there, probably the last week of the campaign just before election.
Right. Susan, you got over 120,000 votes in Michigan. That's remarkable, and especially for someone who's a full-time college student and campaigning as a waitress. I think you did quite a job. And there were how many candidates in that race?
There were 10 altogether.
And what place did you come in?
I came in 5th right after the Democrats and Republicans.
So, and how many were elected?
Just 2 seats.
Okay, you came in 5th. You were the highest third-party candidate.
In the state, yeah.
In the whole state of Michigan, that's great. And you received way more votes than the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in that race, right?
Yes, I did.
And, well, I encourage you to do it again and keep trying for that. Ray, how about you in your race? Do you know how many votes you received?
Yeah, probably a little over 38,000, Matt. The formal figures came out today. The Board of Canvassers met in Lansing today to officially put their imprimatur on the election returns. I haven't seen the results yet, but it's over 38,000 votes, which it sounds a lot better than 1.2% of the total. But what the heck? I was pleased.
That's good.
I can't say pleased. You're pleased if you win, but I'm not disappointed in the total. I came in 3rd in the state in a 4-man race.
Okay, well, that's nothing to be ashamed of, because the Green Party is still growing, it's still young. A lot of people have never heard of the Green Party. They don't know what it stands for. I know when I was campaigning, when people would ask me, you know, what's the Green Party, what's that? I'd say, have you ever heard of Ralph Nader? And they would go, oh yeah, Ralph Nader, he's great, and all that.
You should tell the viewers you ran for U.S. Senate in 2000.
Right, I did. And our producer of this show, Eric Beauregard, was the Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate this year in 2002. and he ran quite a remarkable race as well. None of us have won yet, but we're getting a lot closer. There is an elected drain commissioner in Charlevoix County.
Correct.
And there were several other candidates in Charlevoix that did pretty well on the county commission race.
Yes, they've got as high as 20 or 25% of the vote, the Green candidates for Charlevoix County Commission.
And partly what's going on is the Green Party is still organizing, forming local organizations, what we call locals, and there are more locals that have arisen even since the election, right? And partly because of the work of the two of you traveling around and getting the message out.
I think, if I can interrupt, I think this is a benchmark year for the Greens to some extent. Basically, we're a very, very young party in its infancy. The party consists of all volunteers. The administration, people that work for the party, have never gotten paid.
That's an important point.
Total volunteers.
Because the major parties have tons of money, mostly corporate money, and
well, you have millions of dollars and thousands of employees, and we've got no money, and hopefully tens and hundreds of volunteers and just a few employees. So considering what we've raised, our resources and our manpower, I think it's a tremendous accomplishment this year. Try to do some figures on the money that people spent, the Green candidates, and I came out with a figure roughly between every vote costs the Greens somewhere between 20 and 28 cents, where you go to the Democrats, Republicans, and they had to spend $5 to $10 per vote. So it's interesting.
I got 3 votes for every cent, I think.
Aha.
that's really phenomenal.
Yeah.
3 votes for every cent. Now, if they would just allow people to win, if the system were set up so the person who got the most votes per dollar won, the two of you probably would have been elected.
Well, I think the big problem, especially in Michigan, is that the mainstream media, in fact, most of the media, simply does not cover or does not interview the Green candidates. We're not on the front pages of the newspapers. You get full-page articles on the Democrats, Republicans. We're lucky to get one line at the bottom.
Right,
and
also a little box.
And
somewhere.
also running is a Green candidate, blah, 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 which you read hundreds of times there. And until the major media realizes that we are a legitimate party, we are part of the ballot, that we are growing. In fact, we're the only party I've read
that's growing.
That's growing since 2000.
Right.
Membership in the other two parties, especially Democrats, are actually decreasing. The Green Party is going up in small bits and pieces, but it is going up.
And
so
partly when the press says that a third-party candidate really doesn't have a chance, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because people who read that press tend to believe that, and so they're less likely to vote for a third-party candidate, even if they agree with your views. Susan, what was the main position that you took, if there was one that you could state in your campaign? If you were elected, what did you want to try to do?
Well, I guess all the candidates were all speaking to tuition. Everyone's saying, well, it's too high, we need to bring it down. But as far as financing goes, I was the only candidate who said that the university should look into other aspects besides just profitability when investing money. So that would mean, not taking corporate money from endowments, which in turn can influence research that's being done at the university, or giving license to new research that's being done at the university. That should be public good. It's being publicly funded, but it's corporations that are getting the profiting from this.
Sure. Well, at the University of Michigan, I have no idea what the figures are, but I imagine that endowments from corporations are a substantial part of the research budget. Is that true?
Yeah. The state only gives, I think, 12% of the total research budget, and the University of Michigan had the highest research money volume in the country. It was something, I think it's up to like 600 and some million.
So what would you do? I mean, do you think that money should be replaced by public money, or do you think that we should just cut research at those institutions?
Well, I think we can do a better job trying to get it from nonprofit organizations, and I think the only way for the university to continue serving the public is if it is getting public money, and I think a lot of people just don't see that. It's really hard to say, well, not to take money from something, but I really do think that it impacts the research that's being done and whether or not people are benefiting from it.
Do you know, does that money come with strings attached?
I think it does. when
Either explicitly or implicitly, one way
Right,
or another.
and,
If you don't do what we want, we won't give you more money
Right.
next year.
and a lot of the faculty are, shareholders in the companies that are donating money, so they're working for the university and these corporations.
Sounds like a conflict of interest.
I think so.
Right.
And I was the only candidate to bring that up, and that's one of the important things of running is, you're not necessarily running to win, but if you can bring these things up and you're in these forums with the other candidates, you're forcing them to hear these ideas, forcing other people to hear these ideas, and it's just going to it's a way to give it a little bit more attention.
That's absolutely true. And did any of the other candidates begin to address the issues that you had raised?
Not so much the financing issue, but some of the other issues, definitely student representation. I think there were 3 students running, 2 Greens and a Reform Party candidate. And when asked whether or not the board should have student representation, they all seemed open to the idea and talked about there isn't enough interaction between the Board of Regents and the student body.
Right.
Except the incumbent who claimed she was doing everything right. But
It seems that there should be a student seat on boards of regents or trustees of all our public institutions, but the system is only set up for a straight winner-take-all electoral system, so we would need to restructure that, or to add a member by appointment of the student body president or something like that. That's a good thing, and I'm glad that you ran to raise that, because not enough students feel that they have input into the process. And while you didn't win and you won't be able to affect it that way, I'm sure that people are still thinking about some of the issues that you raised in that election. And Ray, what was the main issue, or what are the main issues that you raised in your election?
Before we get into that, I can sort of augment what Sue said for the MSU trustees. We had 2 candidates there. One was a student at MSU, a doctorate student or master's student that's actually teaching on the outside in high school, and the other was a long-time member of the
Faculty? Right.
And let's face it, we don't have students on our boards, and we don't have faculty members on many of the boards. We have either political hacks, businessmen that probably haven't seen a university for the last 30 years, and there's some problems there. But getting back into my campaign, basically I focused on voting electoral reform.
Because you were running for Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, of course, the 2000 debacle, so-called presidential selection, and the Florida debacle made the Secretary of State's office all of a sudden made people open up their eyes as to the powers and as to the responsibilities of the Secretary of State. In most states, of course, the chief electoral officer in the state, especially in the state of Michigan, basically the keeper of our democracy, if we want to put it that way. And as you get into this, you start realizing that we've got a dysfunctional, broken, unfair, undemocratic, unrepresentative electoral system in this country.
Okay, now I don't want our viewers to think that we're a bunch of left-wing wackos or right-wing wackos or any kind of wackos.
That's not all being bad
No.
right now, because things are in pretty bad shape.
No, and
Yeah,
no, what I
understand.
meant was, just from hearing the statement about how terrible the electoral system is, most people who are not involved in politics don't really see that there's a problem. And what I'd like to do is define for our viewers specifically some of what the problems are.
Okay, number one is, of all the industrialized countries in the world, the United States has the least voting turnout.
Right, and I think everybody acknowledges that. Less than 50% of the people
In the
vote.
decade of the 90s, we had a little over 44% turnout on the average election. Number one, guess what? Guess who number one was? Italy. Everybody laughs at Italy because they have a new president or a new administration. Supposedly, over 90% of the people turn out to vote. Our single district plurality, takes-all system is designed, in fact, to allow the minority to win. It's unrepresentative because many of our elections we do not have majority winners. Clinton in '92, Bush in 2000, and it goes. In fact, this last election, Gary Peters and Cox and the Attorney Generals both got 49%.
Right.
There's hundreds of elections across the country in which majority does not win. Now with the advent of the third party, especially the growth of the Green Party, that could be a common, ordinary thing. So we can keep on throwing figures across, but basically that combined with gerrymandering or redistricting, we know the problems, and that means that most races in this country are not competitive.
Well, I want to make sure our viewers understand that, because the statistics I read, and I can't quote them verbatim, but in this last election, there were, of the 435 congressional seats in the United States.
For the House of Representatives.
For the House of Representatives. There are 100 in the Senate, 435 in the House of Representatives. Less than 150 of those 435 were actually competitive. That the rest of them were all a lock. Everybody knew who was going to win those. Mm-hmm. That there was really very little chance, unless someone died or was arrested, that the results of those elections could be predicted with almost absolute certainty. And in fact, I think that the results of the election have borne that out. That in fact, we knew who was going to win most of those races, and there was no question. Because
Republicans were in charge of redistricting every 10 years, every census year.
Well, it goes state by state.
Correct.
In Michigan, the Republicans were in charge this time because they controlled the House, the Senate, and the Michigan Supreme Court, along with the governor's office. Mm-hmm. And we went from 16 congressional districts to 15 congressional districts. It was 8-6 Democratic, I believe. 14, I guess it was, anyway.
9-5, I thought. But anyway, yes, the
okay.
Democrats were ahead, yeah.
Right, and it's flipped the other way.
Correct.
Now, that I guess it's 9-5
Republican,
mm-hmm. something like that.
Redistricting by itself, gerrymandering, if you want to call it that, is the primary cause of that.
Right, and there really were no close congressional races in Michigan. David Fink challenged Joe Nolenberg,
who was one of your guests sometime back on your show.
One of the people I like to argue with the most, my congressman. And in the race in Western Wayne County between Thaddeus McCotter and Kevin Kelly, that really wasn't close either, although that was an open seat, and they had talked about it being a toss-up, but it wasn't even close. Mm-hmm. That McCotter ran away with the race.
We can talk a lot about this, but the basic net result of all this is most people realize in the state of Michigan that their vote doesn't make a difference.
Right, and that's what we wanted to get to.
And a lot of them correspondingly do not come out to vote. Increasing numbers of people do not come out to vote. Plus, we had campaign finance reform, so-called campaign finance reform, and guess what? More money was raised. Every election has a new historical high for more money. In this case, of course, now the campaign finance will not go into effect until the next election, so we still had the old-style election, which is we're awash in money, special interest and corporate money.
Right. Well, it's in effect now, right? There's no more soft money in federal elections.
But there's going to be twice as much as hard money. And this helps the incumbents.
And they haven't really put any limit on outside issue ads.
Well, remember the election was for federal races, not for state races.
Right.
In fact, the state races are still going to be subject to soft money. Right. The state of Michigan, there won't be any change.
So you had some ideas, and there are lots of ideas for changing the system, but one of the most promising seems to be instant runoff voting. And I wondered if you could describe that for our voters and simply.
Better known as IRV.
IRV.
Well, since we are under time limitations here, here's a quick little definition here I got at the Voting and Democracy Review, a newsletter for Center of Voting and Democracy, which is probably the best known organization that is pushing voting reform within the country.
The Center for Voting and Democracy is a nonprofit group that does research.
Nonpartisan.
And they're the ones who target the races and told us that there really wasn't going to be any choice. In fact, the headline, "No Choice Elections in a Divided Nation."
Yeah, there you go. Instant runoff voting, or IRV, a majority system that simulates a traditional runoff election but doesn't require 2 rounds of voting. People vote for their favorite candidate and indicate their runoff choices by ranking candidates, first, second, third, or no matter how many candidates are running, or just 1 or 2, depending on what you want, choice. If no candidate is the first choice of a majority of voters, voters' rankings are used to simulate a runoff election. In real language, they count the votes. If nobody gets a majority, the person with the least amount of votes is tossed out, and the voters that vote for that person then have their number 2 choice become their effective vote in an instant runoff, and count is taken again immediately until somebody gets a majority.
So the lowest losers' votes are redistributed?
Correct.
And if there's no majority still after that, then the next lowest loses.
Then you go to a third round if necessary. Basically, the requirement for this is you have to have computerized voting equipment or updated voting equipment, which is necessary in the state of Michigan. And ironically, a voting task force headed by Diane Byram, the new minority leader in the Senate, refused to acknowledge that they needed new voting equipment in the state of Michigan because of lack of money, supposedly.
There are many different types of voting equipment in Michigan, right?
Well, we've got the most balkanized system in this. I forget how many there are, perhaps 5 or 6 different systems of voting in the state of Michigan.
In Wayne County alone.
Ironically, yeah, the capital, Lansing, has punch cards, prehistoric voting system.
That's what I was going to say.
Some rural areas still have voting or optical scans or computer-style voting, and it does make a difference. If you want to go by the Supreme Court ruling in the Bush selection, equal opportunity, theoretically every election in the country could be overturned because there's not equal opportunity if you have different voting systems.
Meaning...
IRV needs computerized voting for the instant runoff, so you immediately have an instant count. The benefits, of course, is number one, the winner has to get a majority, which if we call ourselves a democracy, we're really not, we're a representative republic, but we like to use the word democracy. Theoretically, people can accept an election if it's a majority election, no matter if they are in favor of the candidate or not. So the winner has to have a majority. It may not be your first choice, but it's not going to be your last choice, right, the way our elections are set up now. Number two, you save millions of dollars by avoiding instant runoff, by avoiding runoff votes. Most communities cannot afford runoff elections anymore.
Louisiana hasn't decided their Senate race yet. They're going to have a runoff
Mary Landrieu. And three, the spoiler image, the spoiler label on third parties is eliminated. And more people would generally vote for third parties for the first choice, still thinking they're not going to win, but giving them an option to vote for that thing. And number two vote would be somebody else they're less in favor of, but they can still accept. So there are many, many benefits to instant runoff voting. The city of San Francisco adopted it. Every election starting in 2003, entire city of San Francisco is going to be IRV voting. Alaska voted on it last August. It was not successful, but they voted on it statewide, the first statewide referendum. Australia's used it for 8 decades. The mayor of London, many communities, many cities, many countries still are using IRV voting, yet the state of Michigan refused to even discuss it or acknowledge it.
Right. There's a new push on in many communities throughout the country.
Ann Arbor used it in 1975 to elect Alma Wheeler-Smith's father.
Oh, was that right?
The first black mayor of Ann Arbor. And the next year, the Democrats, Republicans got together and put the kibosh on it, eliminated it. The Democrats and Republicans do not want electoral reform, especially the Republicans. They do not. You're not going to get...
I'm not sure the Democrats do either.
The Democrats don't want it either. At least Diane Byram doesn't want it, or their task force doesn't want it. They're scared of it because it's a change. In fact, more people will benefit from it. Money and gerrymandering and everything else in our system has less importance, and it helps people, helps democracy. More people come out to vote. More citizens, more candidates will come out to vote because they've got a better chance of getting more votes.
More candidates, more choices, more democracy.
Better campaigns. Good. Our campaigns are ridiculous now. They're poll-driven, they're money-driven, they're not issue-driven.
Right.
And that keeps people away from the polls.
The nice thing about
also.
instant runoff is candidates will be seeking second and third choice votes too. And so it prevents negative campaigning in a way because they're more likely to need those other place votes.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, if you know you're not going to get the majority, which in many races you're not sure of anymore because it is so split down the middle of our country, you've got to run for the second place votes, not just for the first place votes.
And appeal to a wider audience then. So what would it take to get instant runoff voting in Michigan? It could be done legislatively, right, by the Michigan House and Senate? Not that it will live that long.
In Michigan, statewide, the best way we think to do it is to try to go around community by community. And the biggest obstacle right now is just people don't know what it is. So
if we start at local communities, people will learn more about it. They'll be using it. They'll be used to using it. They'll see how it works, and they'll see how wonderful it is.
And it has been proven constitutional in Michigan. And right now, we wouldn't have to change the Constitution. We could get it on the ballot. It would take a ballot referendum. So if we couldn't talk them into putting it on the ballot, it would take several 100,000 signatures, and we could get a referendum on the ballot.
Well, that's statewide, but right now a community, a city, can adopt instant runoff voting.
Right.
It doesn't require a constitutional change in the state of Michigan. It has been done. It's being done. There's 53 communities in Vermont that have instant runoff voting, and there's a big discussion to do it statewide right now in the state of Vermont.
Maybe I should have stayed there. Just kidding. I went to high school in Vermont. So,
the taxes are low there too, aren't they?
Right. It's a beautiful country. I didn't appreciate it when I lived there, but now I would.
Unless we change our voting system, unless really, I firmly believe this, and this is what I ran in my campaign, and I think I convinced about 98% of the people I talked to, unless we change our voting system, unless we get more modernized, unless we get more inclusive and get more people into it, we're going to keep on going downhill into a downward spiral in our political system.
And the turnout will be less and less.
It's really bad now. In fact, I just found out we went to a ethics forum at Oakland University this last Friday, myself and some more Greens. Not only are we in the bottom in the industrialized countries in the world, we're almost on the bottom in every country in the world in our voting turnout.
It's really
literally
shameful.
We've got one of the worst voting turnouts in the entire world. We can't operate that way. I don't think we could.
Right. Well, we just have a couple of minutes left in this show, and I want to give both of you an opportunity to say whatever you'd like that we haven't covered. Basically, this show has been about voting and about elections and the Green Party. Susan, do you think you might run for office again? I asked you that, and I guess I think you should, but is it an experience you wouldn't want to go through again?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think the best part about running was just gaining the knowledge of knowing how to run a campaign and what not to do and what to do. And so I think I could be pretty effective in helping somebody else run their campaign, or I could run again myself. But if I did it, I'd probably want to do it for something local that I had a better chance
and
of
so you
winning.
Wouldn't have to travel so far.
Yeah, that, and I mean, it's just a little bit more realistic trying to think resources on a local level than going statewide, because we may never have the money, but it is possible to have the people. So I had about 30 volunteers in Ann Arbor, and I think, I mean, that helped a little bit in just getting, people all over the state. But it'd be much easier on a smaller scale.
Right. And Ray, do you think you might run again?
I don't know. I really haven't thought about it. It's I'm getting a little long in the tooth, as they say. This is pretty, she's the future of politics. People like her are the future of politics, not only in the state, but the whole country. And it's a young person's game. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of time to some extent, and more importantly, dedication to what's going on.
Well, on that note, we have to wrap up, but sure. I think what you said is very important, that we need to get young people involved, and we need them to understand that there is an opportunity out here, and that without good candidates, our electoral system is just going to fail. So again, I'm Matthew Abel, here today with Susan Fawcett, Ray Ziarno. You've been watching In the Green. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope you'll join us again. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.